We're continuing the Shir in Sichos Aharon. We're up to paragraph Reish Tzadik Gimel 293. Rav Nosson says that I once heard somebody say over in Rabbi Arizal's name regarding somebody that had spoken to Rabbi Arizal, and Rabbi Arizal told this person to be careful to daven with a lot of kavona, with a lot of concentration. And Rabbi Arizal said to this person that just like the Gemara says, hakoil mo'irer hakavona, that when a person davens completely silent, where there's no sound coming forth from their tefillah, very often that'll hurt the person's concentration. That'll make it much easier for the person's mind to drift and wander from what they're saying. They're not going to be thinking of the words that they're saying, which means that tefillah is going to be much less effective. The Gemara says that a tefillah without kavona is like a guf without a neshama. Just like a body without a neshama, without a soul, is dead. It can't move at all. That body can't do anything. It can't produce anything. It can't affect anything. So too a tefillah, when a person is davening without kavana, obviously that tefillah also can't really be too effective. So the Gemara says that one of the ways that a person could help themselves in terms of having kavana is to make sure that there's koil in their tefillah, that when they're davening, they say the words where they hear what they're saying. Naturally, this excludes the tefillah of Shmoneh Esrei, which is supposed to be said balachash, silently. But other than that, whenever a Jew is davening, a Jew davens out loud, where you hear sound coming from his tefillah. So Rabbi Arizal says that this is what the Gemara says, and the reverse is true also, that there are times when a person will be davening in silence, and he won't be able to light himself up. He won't be able to awaken himself and activate himself in tefillah. And Rabbi Arizal says if the person will pull their concentration together and try to really concentrate on the words of the tefillah, on what they're saying, they're going to see that the concentration alone is going to bring them to daven out loud. It's the kavana will be mo'irer, the koil, that the concentration on the tefillah will arouse the person to daven out loud, and that's obviously what makes effective. And Rav Nosson writes, "V'chein nira b'chush kama pomim." People that will try this see that this happens very often, that it works this way, that a person first doesn't feel aroused to davening out loud, but it's because his mind isn't really concentrating on what he's saying. And when the person starts looking at the siddur, looking in the siddur, and really concentrating on what they're saying, that alone will bring them to want to raise their voice in tefillah. And we've mentioned this many times before. Unfortunately, I really don't think it's helped yet, to a degree. And the Gemara says that hoicheach toichiach, that there's a mitzvah to reprimand. When you see a person doing something that's not right, or that's not as good as it should be, the Gemara says that a Jew is required to inform, to notify the person that they're doing something not right. And the Gemara says the fact that the Torah says, hoicheach toichiach, reprimand, this comes to teach us that even if a person has to reprimand again and again, they're still obligated to do it and hope that maybe on the 100th time, maybe the other person will get the message. If there's anything that a person would not want a shul to resemble, it's a cemetery, it's a morgue. Because tefillah, especially the way Rabbi Arizal presents it, is the exact opposite of that. Tefillah is called life. Rabbi Arizal quotes a posek in Tehillim where the posek says, Tefillah lokel chayoy. Davening to Hashem, that's my life. And Rabbi Arizal says that a person should know that in terms of ruchnius, if a person wants to know how alive they are or how dead they are, a person could simply measure it by the tefillah. According to how awake their tefillah is, according to how much kavana is in it, according to the koil in the tefillah, this is what determines to what extent that person is considered alive by Rabbi Arizal standards. Unfortunately, there are many shuls, especially when they're davening shachris early in the morning. I can't imagine what the reason is. Once a person knows that this is what Rabbeinu Zal's advice is, and that this is considered so important, and yet, halavai, we should be zeicher that this item should be corrected. But in any case, Rabbeinu Zal stresses that this is called tefillah. Tefillah is kavana and koil. It's davening with kavana, with concentration, and it's also a person bringing forth sound in tefillah. This doesn't contradict at all the fact that a person's not supposed to be ostentatious. A person should never allow there to be in a situation where they're in a certain place and they stick out. The person is boilate, which means everybody else is davening a certain way. One person is davening much differently, and it's very noticeable. A person wouldn't want that to be the case. However, at the same time, oy to that person, chas v'sholom, who would allow their shul to be absent from sound, to be asleep, or chas v'sholom, Rabbeinu Zal says a level further, not to be living in terms of tefillah. The next item, paragraph Reish Tzadik Dalet, 294. Rav Nosson Zal says that I heard Rabbeinu Zal say that throughout the month of Elul, when there is a minig Yisrael to say Tikuney Zohar, this was obviously more common in those days during Rabbeinu Zal's times, especially among the Chassidim, since a lot of Chassidus, a lot of the world of Chassidus is based on the Yesodos, on the foundation of the Mekubalim. It was a custom at that time for people to read the Tikuney Zohar during the month of Elul, and also to say more Tehillim than they were normally used to. The Matei Ephraim brings that a person should make sure to say at least 10 chapters of Tehillim a day throughout the month of Elul, which is a month of Teshuva, and plus other additional bakoshas that people add at the end of Tefillah. So Rav Nosson Zal says that Rabbeinu Zal commented about this, about the fact that people stay later in shul during the month of Elul than they normally do, and they read the Tikuney Zohar also with a special nigun. There's a special song, a sing-song voice that's used in reading the Tikuney Zohar. Rabbeinu Zal said you should know that the fact that Jews stay in shul an extra half hour and they fast for that period of time, meaning they delay their breakfast or their meal for that extra amount of time, that suffering, and again, Rabbeinu Zal wasn't a dramatist. It's not as if he's trying to say that it's so terrible that a person give up an extra half hour for Hashem, but at the same time, Rabbeinu Zal said this is something that Hashem definitely acknowledges. The fact that a Yid is willing to put in that extra half hour and delay their meal for that period of time, and also the special nigun that's used for reading Tikunei Zohar, from these items are affected Dvorim Gevoyim Ugedolim Lamala. These items affect tremendous tikkunim in heaven. There are major things that are accomplished by the fact that Yidden go that extra mile. They show a certain extra level of devotion during the month of Elul than they do at other times. The next paragraph, Reish Tzadikei, Rav Nosson Zal says that I heard people say over in the name of Rabbeinu Zal regarding a person being mechazik themselves in tefillah. Meaning that there are certain people that could sometimes think that the fact that I'm not that religious, the fact that I'm not that great a Talmud Chacham, I'm not that great a tzadik, and certainly the fact that I've committed many sins, this obviously weakens my tefillah and makes my tefillah much less important than a person who doesn't have these many sins and that's on a higher level than me. And Rabbeinu Zal said, the fact is that a person should know that the opposite is true. That bedafka, such a person who's far from Hashem, a person who has committed many sins, that person also is a very important ingredient in the shleimus hatfila of Bnei Yisrael. In order for the tefillah of the Jewish people to be considered complete, it's not considered complete unless it has included in it the tefillos of Rishoim or Posek Yisrael or people who are not that religious or not that good in religion. We know that the Gemara says that one of the most important sacrifices that was brought in the Beis HaMikdash was the Ktoros, a special offering of incense, which was made from a combination of 11 different spices. And one of the 11 spices, the chelbana, the Gemara says was something that had a very foul odor. And the Gemara explains that this corresponds to those people whose lives give off a foul odor, which means, Rahman al-Itzlan, they commit sins, they do things that Hashem despises, and this is called a reach ra, chas v'shalom, a bad odor. And yet we find that the Gemara says very clearly that if the kohen would try to offer this sacrifice and exclude the chelbana, leave out the chelbana, it was not acceptable to Hashem. The chelbana added a shleimus, that's what made the Ktoros complete. And therefore, so too, Rabbi Nachman says, if a person is ever feeling low, feeling that they're not that good, they're not that religious, that alone should give a person encouragement to say that that's why my tefillah is very necessary, because I represent a certain section that only when I'm in this position can I fill that need, the need for chelbana and Niktoris, the need for Posek Yisrael to be included in the tefillah. In fact, the Gemara says a very clear statement that any fast, any time that the Jews have a fast day, and included in that, and the Rishoim are excluded from the fast, they don't participate, that fast is not accepted by Hashem. Kavyochel, there's a special nachas that Hashem gets when people that are far from Kedusha make an effort on their level to do what they can. It's also brought that this is the meaning of the concept of tefillah b'tzibur. When we talk about a Jew, the Gemara stresses that when a Jew davens alone, that tefillah is very carefully examined by Malachim in heaven and by Hashem himself, and it's very difficult for such a tefillah to be presented in a way that will be totally acceptable by Hashem. In fact, there are many cases where such a tefillah, chas v'shalom, is torn up. That's the wording that the Sforim use. It's torn up by the Malachim before it even gets to where it's supposed to get to, because of the fact that it's incomplete, it's lacking in kavana, or it's lacking in other necessary ingredients that a tefillah is supposed to have. However, the Gemara says that when a Jew davens tefillah b'tzibur, when a person davens in a group, which means at least a minimum of 10 people, the Gemara says that tefillah is never rejected by Hashem. In fact, the Malachim are not given permission to examine such a tefillah. That goes right past them without them being able to have the opportunity to look, to examine, to question in any way. The word tzibur, the Meforshim point out, is also an acronym for the term, the tzadik stands for tzadikim, the beis stands for beinonim, and the vav reish stands for urishoim. The tefillah b'tzibur is when you have a combination of these three different types of people joining together, which means that a tzibur, a shul, is not considered a shul if it does not have rishoim in it, if it doesn't have people in it that are far from Hashem, that are in the process of trying to come close to Hashem. If a minyan is made up of all tzadikim, in a sense that minyan is lacking a certain necessary ingredient for giving Hashem nachas. And our Rebbe Zohar once said that when we say in the Shemon Esrei, Ki ata shomea tfilas kol peh amcha Yisrael berachamim, you Hashem listen and accept the tefillah of every single person with kindness. The word berachamim is bigimatria b'tzibur, exactly. That what guarantees a level of rachmanis on the part of Hashem, that Hashem will definitely not reject anybody's tefillah, that's when the person is a member of a tzibur. When they're part of a tzibur, that's a guarantee that no matter who it is, Kiyata Shmei Tfilas Kol Peh, that everybody's tefillah that's part of the tzibur will be accepted. So here Rabbi Nachman stressed that when a person finds that they're looking at themselves as being a rasha, that should be an encouragement also for davening. That I definitely have a position in the shul and a position in the karbonos, and my position is needed as much as anybody else's to bring a shleimus to the tefillah. The next paragraph, Reish Tzadik Vov, Rabbi Arizal says that during davening, a Jew should attach themselves to the tzadikim of their generation. This doesn't mean only to the tzadikim of their generation, it means to the tzadikim of their generation and also to all the tzadikim of previous generations. And it's based on this item, based on the fact that Rabbi Arizal said that this is something that should be done, that there was a custom among Rabbi Arizal's followers that before they would begin any tefillah, they would first say the words, Hareini mekasher atzmi l'chol hatzadikim shebedoreinu, that I hereby attach myself to all the tzadikim of our generation, and then also ulechol hatzadikim amitim shoich neofor kedoshim asher b'oretzema, and also to all the tzadikim who have already passed away. This item is mentioned here in Sichos Saran, and it's also mentioned in 2 chapters in Likutei Moharan. And in these 2 places, Rabbi Arizal gives 2 distinct reasons as to why this is so important. We know that the Torah says that when Hashem gave the Jews the privilege of building a Mishkan for Hashem, Hashem said, V'osu li mikdosh v'shochanti b'soicham, that Bnei Yisrael should make for me a place, and I will rest among you. Once this place will be established, the Mishkan, Kavyochel, Hashem said, I guarantee that my presence will be there. In order to establish this place, what was necessary? There were all kinds of required ingredients: gold, silver, copper, wool, linen, all different kinds of things that went into it. And Hashem instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to call out to all the Yidden that each and every single Jew who feels generous, who feels that they want to be zeicha to take part in this mitzvah of preparing a place for Hashem, each and every single person should contribute. The posek says that all the Yidden brought from whatever they were able to bring. This, whoever had wood brought wood, gold, silver, all the different ingredients. And the posek says, "Vayoviu hamishkan el Moshe." They brought the Mishkan to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Zohar HaKodesh says that why does the posek stress that all of these things were brought to Moshe Rabbeinu? Everything had to be brought to Moshe Rabbeinu? They couldn't do anything without him? I mean, fine, he told them to bring things, and then he should have established a few managers and everything, and let them carry on, let them take care of the actual building. Why does the pasuk stress this point, Vayoviu hamishkan el Moshe, that all the ingredients had to be brought to Moshe Rabbeinu? The Zohar HaKodesh says, because the tzadik, Moshe Rabbeinu, is the only one who knows la'ayla shaifa b'shaifa, to build the koimas hashchina. Now that's to build, to put together the model, kaviochel, into which the light of Hashem could be placed. That knowledge is something that only tzaddikim possess. True, they can't do it themselves. They need Bnei Yisrael to bring them the ingredients, all the different ingredients. But as far as putting together these ingredients, to make just the right formula and just the right mix that's needed to draw the presence of the Shekhinah there, that's an avodah that's only for the tzaddik. It's only tzaddikim that possess this knowledge. And therefore, the Zohar HaKodesh says, all the Yidden had to know that they had to come on to Moshe Rabbeinu for this. Fine, they could all contribute, but as far as putting it together, none of them, and not all of them put together, were not in a position to build the Mishkan without Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabbi Arizal says that so too in terms of our tefillos. The Gemara says that the tefillos, the Beis HaKnesses, the shuls in which Bnei Yisrael are mispalel today, those are in place of the Beis HaMikdash, or the Mishkan. The pasuk says, Ki beisi beis tefillah yikorei l'chol ha'amim. Hashem says, my house, the Beis HaMikdash, or the Mishkan, are called a base tefillah. And in fact, we know that the Shulchan Aruch calls a shul a mikdash ma'at, which means our version of a Beis HaMikdash. What do we use as ingredients to build with in a shul? The answer is our tefillahs. Rabbi Nachman says each and every single tefillah of a yid represents an aver of the Shechina Kaviyachol. And the purpose of our tefillahs is to build up the Shechina to a shleimus. Each and every single Jew participates in helping to be mashlim the koimas hashchina. Just as the Arizal says that the Gemara discusses many times the sum total of neshamos of Bnei Yisrael as being 600,000. The totality of the Am Yisrael is represented by 600,000 souls, 600,000 neshamos. The Arizal says that the word Shechina, spelled b'milui, the shin, spelled the way it's pronounced, shin yud nun, the chaf, spelled the way it's pronounced, chaf pei, and yud vav dalid, and so on and so forth. The word Shechina, b'milui, is b'gematria tov reish aleph, 601. Aleph in Hebrew means one, or elef, 1,000. It's the same word. So that the Arizal says the Shechina has a one-to-one correspondence with the 600,000 neshamos of Bnei Yisrael. As Bnei Yisrael achieve shleimus, Kaviyachol the Shechina achieves shleimus. However, the one that makes it happen, the one that brings the neshamos of Bnei Yisrael together, and the one that brings their tefillos together, and knows which tefillah should be a window, which tefillah should be a doorknob, which tefillah should be a ceiling, which tefillah should be a floor, in order to build this binyan for the Shechina, that's only the tzadik. And therefore Rabbi Nachman says that not chas v'sholom that we daven to the tzadik, we daven to Hashem, but we don't plan to hand over, to deliver our tefillah directly from our hands into Hashem's hands. We conceptualize our tefillah as gold and silver, as these different ingredients for building. When we say Hareini Mekasher in the beginning of our tefillah, we're implying that this tefillah that I'm going to say now, I'm turning it over into the hands of the tzadikim. And I'm asking them to assume responsibility. They know what to do with it. They know how to polish it. They know how to sand it down. They know how to trim it. They know exactly where it's supposed to fit into the total picture. And this is what my kavona is in being mekasher my tefillah to these tzadikim. This is one way that Rabbi Nachman explains the importance of this. This is presented in Torah Beis in Likutei Moharan Chelik Aleph, and then in Torah Tes, chapter 9 in Likutei Moharan Chelik Aleph, Rabbi Nachman mentions another reason. We know that the Gemara and the Sforim HaKadoshim discuss the fact that there isn't only one gate where tefillos enter in heaven. The Gemara says that each and every single shevet, each and every single one of the 12 tribes has their own shar, their own entranceway in Shamayim, through which their tefillos are supposed to come through. Naturally, just as lahavdil in Gashmias, if a person is supposed to go through one door and they go through a wrong door, you can assume that they're not going to be able to accomplish in the wrong place what they could accomplish if they go to the right place. If Kaviyachol Hashem in His infinite wisdom understands that there have to be these separate places where the tefillos of each shevet goes to, then we could understand that it would be a kilkul. It would mess things up if a person's tefillah goes through the wrong entrance. The question is, how can a person know to be able to direct their tefillah to make sure that it goes through the right shar? Rabbi Nachman says again, this is not something that an ordinary Jew is capable of guaranteeing. This is one of the avodas of tzadikim. The tzadikim are the ones who play traffic cop. And they're the ones who have the kedusha, the holiness, and the status by Hashem, that they're in a position, those tefillos that are given over to them, they're in a position to direct them to wherever they know it should go. The tzaddik knows exactly which door it should go through, or at certain times which gates are closed. Lahavdil in Gashmias, there are times that a certain lane is crowded, and you have to reroute something through a different entrance. Lahavdil in Kiddusha also. The Gemara says that there are times that certain gates in heaven are closed. The Gemara says that since the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the Sharei Tefillah are basically assumed to be closed. It's the Sharei Demois that are open. The gates of tears in heaven, those are open. So what happens when a Jew davens a tefillah, and that Jew isn't privileged to have tears in their tefillah? And yet the person would want to be able to take advantage of somebody else's tears, and be able to have their tefillah go in through the gateway of tears. The answer is, if a person is zeicha to be attached to a tzadik, and if a person is zeicha bedafka to attach their tefillah to the tzaddik, to be mekasher themselves before they daven to the tzaddik, by doing that they're giving the tzaddik permission, and they're giving the tzaddik the right to be able to do this for them, to be able to help their tefillah. Now a person would say that tzaddik needs my permission, he needs me to tell him it's okay, and the answer is most definitely, because we find many examples where a tzaddik is not in a position to help a person until the person does something to clearly prove that they want that help. The Torah says, "Bisfosov chibduni, v'liboy rochak mimeni." There are times that a person is willing to give lip service. They're willing to say something respectful, even though they don't really feel it inside. So here also, there could be certain cases where a person thinks they want their tefillah to be the right way and everything, but in terms of really meaning it deep down inside, there could be a lot that's lacking in the kavanah. And Rashi HaKodesh in Chumash gives an example that when Avimelech had to come on to the tefillah of Avraham Avinu, he needed Avraham Avinu to be mispal for him. Rashi HaKodesh says that Avimelech gave Avraham Avinu a present, a gift, so that Avraham Avinu should be able to daven for him. Without the gift, he couldn't daven for him. The answer is, without the gift, the tefillah would not have been as effective. A tzaddik can't come before Hashem and say, Hashem, this person wants my help, if the person didn't really ask for the tzaddik's help. And this concept of a person saying, Hareini Mekasher, is a way of saying that I realize that I'm imperfect. I realize that I alone, on my own merit, cannot guarantee that my tefillah is going to be the way it should be, or that my tefillah is going to get to where it's supposed to get to. However, one thing I am confident, that there are definitely tzaddikim alive in this generation, and that there were also tzaddikim in the past, and they definitely do have the ability to take the tefillos of the entire Am Yisrael, and be mesader it, and make sure it gets to where it's supposed to get to. This item, this eitz of the Hareini Mekasher, is something that could also be done besides tefillah. When a Jew is going to do any mitzvah, if a person wants to ensure, again, that mitzvah will accomplish what it's supposed to accomplish, and that in terms of building the koimas hashchina, in terms of bringing about a yichud kutshabrichu shchinte, we know that there are sforim that write that a mitzvah is supposed to affect certain things. Naturally, whether the mitzvah will affect everything it's supposed to depends to a great degree on the one that's doing it. How pure their intentions are, how perfect they are in knowing all the rules and regulations of exactly how this mitzvah needs to be done. But there is a concept of protectia. Lahavdil, just as on earth, there are certain cases where a person themselves, on their own merit, can't necessarily be zeicher, and yet if you know the right person, if you have the right connection can bring something through much more easily than somebody else with more money and more kishroinos. This one would have a greater advantage. This is why the Zohar Kodesh and the Gemara mention the expression Zanvo da Aryeh, that the tail of a lion is still part of the lion, and it's better for a person to be the tail of a lion than the head of a fox. The lion represents the chief tzaddik. The Gemara discusses different rabbis of the Gemara, and how one said, how could you compare me to him when he's a lion, the son of a lion, and I'm the lion, the son of a fox? Comparing different levels of greatness among tzaddikim to animals of different levels of strength. Lahavdil. Here also the Gemara stresses that even if a person is a tail of the lion, which means he's attached to the lion, but he's way in the back. He's the furthest part from the moyach of the lion, from the most important part of the lion. Still he travels with the lion, and he gets all the benefits. Who's afraid of the tail of a lion? I mean, all you need is a little stick to destroy the tail of a lion. But people aren't crazy enough to tamper with the tail of a lion, because they know that the tail is connected to the rest, and it's not the tail that's noikin, it's the head of the lion that avenges the tail. And here also, lahavdil, when we talk about a person who has the awesome privilege of being zoche to be attached to tzadikim, that person looks at themselves at worst as being a concept of a tail of a lion, with the assurance that they go with the protectia of the lion himself. This is an important point. The question is, let's say a person feels that they're attached to the greatest tzaddik. If that's the case, does that person need to come on to other tzaddikim in any way? And the answer is that I believe this is a mistake that many people could make. If a person simply looks at the example of Rabbi Zal's advice, Rabbi Zal praised his sefer. Let's take one item as an example. Rabbi Zal said about his sefer, the Likutei Moharan, that this is one of the most outstanding sforim that was ever introduced to the world. And Rabbi Zal told his Talmidim that when this sefer was introduced to the world, this is the Aschalta de Geula. This is the beginning of Moshiach's coming. The fact that this sefer, this light, was introduced into the world. Rabbi Zal said that each and every single chapter in the Likutei Moharan, there's close to 400 chapters in Likutei Moharan, each and every single chapter contains in it the entire Torah. The entire Torah Shebechsav, Torah Shebal Peh, Shulchan Aruch, Kabbalah, everything. If a person would take a chapter in Likutei Moharan and study it the right way, they would be able to see in a chapter the entire Torah. One of Rabbi Zal's Talmidim, actually one of Rav Nosson Zal's Talmidim, Rabbi Nachman Shigarin Zal, said that just in case anybody has any doubts, a little kid like me will show you an example. And he took the entire Shulchan Aruch, all 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch, Orachaim, Yerodea, Choshen Mishpat, Even Ezer, consisting of close to 2,000 chapters of halacha, and took the first chapter in Likutei Moharan, which is 1 page, and he showed how that page contains in it all of the halachos that are found in all 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch, to show it as an example. So a person would say, therefore, certainly a person that's attached to Rabbi Zal has no excuse, no justification whatsoever for learning any other sforim, because everything you need is right here. And yet we know Rabbi Zal instructed his Talmidim, the Ferish, very clearly, to learn the Torah Shebechsav, to learn the Torah Shebal Peh, to learn all the Shulchan Aruchs, to learn Mesilas Yeshorim, to learn Reishis Chochma, to learn the Sefer HaTanya. There was certain sforim that he even singled out beferish, such as these that I'm mentioning. The question is why? And the answer is that even though we know and we believe that there is a tzadik in every generation who is koileh all the other tzadikim, the fact is that tzaddik wants those that are attached to him to also be attached to all the others. There's no question of leaving out, ignoring the others because I'm attached here. On the contrary, if I believe that this tzaddik is the greatest one, then I believe that what makes him great is that he's a klolius of all the others, number 1, and number 2, that he's plugged in perfectly well to all the others. We find Rabbi Zal at times sent his Talmidim to other tzaddikim for a bracha, different times, and many different examples where he stressed that there definitely is a kesher, a need for a kesher with these other tzaddikim. Rabbi Zal stressed the saying of the Sefer Shemas HaTzaddikim, that reading the names of all tzaddikim represents making a connection with these different tzaddikim, and thereby being able to draw upon oneself the zechus of all the good deeds that each and every one of those tzaddikim did. By mentioning his name, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. When you mention a tzaddik's name, you remind Hashem of all the different fantastic things that tzaddik did during his whole life, and that opens a door by Hashem, that arouses Hashem's Rahmanas. So there's no question at all that we consider both important. The concept of a rosh bayis, the concept of a leading tzadik, but not that that's mevatel the other tzadikim. A person definitely would want to be attached more so, aseh l'chorav, a concept of having a Rebbe muvhak, but not that eliminating a person from learning mikol melamdai hiskalti, from learning from other sforim, other rabbonim also.
One tzaddik is not sufficient. One tzaddik must do more than just say, I can't say I want to be a Christian and not do anything. So, but if I were speaking, it's sufficient to say.
No, I would think that with all the other tzaddikim also, it's a matter of learning their advice. It's a matter of respecting them in every way that a person can, showing the right respect for them, whatever that means, whether it's learning their sforim, or whether it's being mechaven to really want that all of them should do their part. Notice we don't, even though, for example, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai made a statement in the Gemara saying that if there's any problem, if Hashem has any complaints in a sense to everybody else in the world, my zechus alone will be enough to support the entire world. And yet still, we know for sure that all the other Tanoim that played a role in that generation, and certainly the Talmidim of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself, the chavraya that he functioned with, there was a need for each and every one of them. Each and every one of them was doing something besides what he was doing. The next paragraph, Reish Tzadik Zayin, Rav Nosson Zal says that Rabbeinu Zal spoke to us many times about the following item. Sheritzoinoi chozok ma'oid, that Rabbeinu Zal wanted very much that we should go with his shiurim. We should walk with his shiurim. Meaning that a person should take one of Rabbeinu Zal's shiurim, a chapter in Likutei Moharan, and live with that for, let's say, 2-3 months. Live totally wrapped up in that shiur, in that chapter in Likutei Moharan. Meaning that all the person's tefillos and all the person's avodos should be plugged into that chapter. Meaning, any mitzvah, for example, if a person, Rabbeinu Zal gave a shiur in Likutei Moharan where he spoke about Yira, the midah of Yira. If a person would want to connect every single item in religion to Yira, if a person knows enough about the Torah, they could do it without any problem. For example, the mitzvah of tefillin. A person putting on tefillin in the morning would definitely be able to connect his putting on tefillin to a shiur that Rabbeinu Zal gave about fear of Hashem. Because the Gemara says that one of the main concepts of the mitzvah of tefillin is V'ro kol ha'amim ki shem Hashem nikro alecha v'yoru mimeka. That tefillin is a symbol of fear, awe. That when a non-Jew sees a Jew wearing the tefillin, this is supposed to put a pachad on him. So we see how the mitzvah of tefillin is mekusher to the union of yira. And so too a person could actually go from every single avodah we find in Likutei Halachos, for example. Rav Nosson does this many times. He takes a chapter in Likutei Moharan and he takes us for a walk through the entire Torah, through all the different holidays, through all the different important events in Jewish history, showing how this chapter in Likutei Moharan is a pirush on all of those items. So here Rav Nosson Zal says that Rabbeinu Zal wanted his Talmidim to take these shiurim seriously. Not that a person comes into a shiur, he listens to what's being said, and he walks out not writing it down in his mind and heart, not spending hours of tefillah, begging Hashem to be zecher, to be mekayim, everything that was said in that shiur, and not trying to use his brain to expand the shiur, to be able to see what the other applications of this are, but the opposite. Rabbeinu Zal wanted a person, his Talmidim, to take each shiur and make a project out of it, and actually work on it for a few months, davening, trying to work on every single aspect of what's mentioned in that shiur, and to improve myself through each and every one of those nekudos. And then when a person feels that they've gone as far as they could with one chapter, to go on to the next chapter, and use that for a few weeks or a few months, or the maximum that the person is able to do. And Rav Nosson Zal writes, V'diber kamo pa'omemize. Rabbeinu Zal spoke about this many times. Ashrei mi sheyoches bozeh. Fortunate is that person who's zeicha to be holding by this, to take it that seriously. And here it pays again to note the importance that this term being attached to a tzadik or being a chassid of a certain Rebbe is not anywhere near as is not to be taken anywhere near as lightly as certain people might. If a person looks at how Rabbeinu Zal wanted, how serious Rabbeinu Zal wanted his followers to take their connection to him and to take his shurim, a person says they're connected to a tzaddik, it doesn't mean, it's not by touch, it's not by holding his hand, it's not by looking at his picture. The kesher to a tzaddik, the ikar kesher to tzaddikim throughout all generations was through their Torah, through their teachings, through their advice, to the fact that the tzaddik brought that person closer to Hashem through his shiurim. That was the means, that was the main kesher between Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehoshua. It didn't matter to Yehoshua if Moshe Rabbeinu was 5'8" or 7 feet tall, or any other nekuda. The ikar shebikrim in the kesher was that every time he had an opportunity to learn something from him, that was what counted. That's what made the connection between the Rebbe and the student. Rabbeinu Zal quotes a posek in Chumash right before Moshe Rabbeinu was about to pass away, where Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehoshua went into an oihel, a tent together, where Moshe Rabbeinu passed over to Yehoshua all of his knowledge and the ruach, the ruach of kedusha that Moshe Rabbeinu had, and certainly in the case of Rabbeinu Zal, the purpose in coming to him wasn't to chap shirayim, it wasn't to get kugel, it wasn't to get brachas for parnasa. The purpose that he wanted people to come to him for was to seek to improve themselves in terms of religion, closeness to Hashem, both bein odam lamokoim and bein odam lachaveroi. And Rabbeinu Zal took his shiurim very seriously, to the extent that he was willing to have his talmidim make such a serious project out of it. Halavai, we should be zeicha to take these words serious and to take full advantage. The Gemara says in Chagiga, there's a long discussion in the Gemara as to what the definition of a shoiter is. How do we define a fool in Yiddishkeit? And the Gemara presents a whole bunch of different alternatives and discusses each and every one of them and disproves, shows how this couldn't be the most accurate definition of shoiter. And at the end of a whole major discussion, the Gemara says the final word is that the best suited definition of shoiter is hama'abed mashanoisim loi, a person who throws away something precious that's given to them. When somebody's given something valuable, a treasure, and they don't take it serious, and now how is a person ma'abed? How does a person lose something? The Gemara says it's very simple. Hesech hadas. A person's holding a briefcase that cost $50, and the briefcase has important papers in it, and the person puts it down for a minute and then walks away from it and forgets to take it. What made them lose that briefcase? It's the fact that for 1 minute they weren't thinking about the briefcase. If a person is thinking about something constantly, it's impossible to lose that item. The whole concept of an Aveda comes through a Hesech Hadas. And so too, especially, there certainly isn't any greater treasure than the teachings that a person receives from their rabbi. And if a person, chas v'sholom, is ma'abe that, a person shows that it's not important enough, it's not serious enough to hold on to, and to use and reuse, that would certainly, chas v'sholom, represent fulfilling this title of shoiter. Halavai, we should be zeicha to draw upon ourselves the das HaKodesh of Rabbeinu Zal, and to be zeicha to understand what Rabbeinu Zal wanted from us, and to put enough tefillos into it. Rav Nosson Zal once said at the end of one of his shiurim, if he gave a shiur, those people that were zeicha to learn Likutei Halachos know that each one of his shiurim was enough to take a dead person and bring him back to life, to be mechayim esim. That's how powerful his divrei Torah were. And yet, at the end of one of his shiurim, Rav Nosson Zal said that our words, if you don't spend hours of hisbodedus begging Hashem to be mekayim them, binechayich gornisht mekana, then I don't envy your position, chas v'sholom. Meaning, you'll be very sorry. A person who's zeicha to hear these kind of words and doesn't make it their business to follow up, to do what they need to follow up, that person is certainly held accountable for that. We should be zeicha in the zechus of emunas tzadikim and learning the words of tzadikim to get to see the coming of Moshiach. We're up to paragraph Reish Tzadik Ches, 298. Rav Nosson says that the last year of Rabbeinu Zal's life, we know that Rabbeinu Zal passed away during the holiday of Sukkot, Chalamoid Sukkot. That year, on Erev Yom Kippur, one of Rabbeinu Zal's followers came to him, who was very ill at the time, and he was telling Rabbeinu Zal about the suffering he was going through and about this illness that he was experiencing for a certain period of time. At the time that this person was telling it over, there was a friend of his standing by from the same city, and this person said to Rabbeinu Zal that true, he was ill, but I know that there was something that aggravated his sickness, that made it much worse. And that's the fact that he went to the mikveh today. And the going to the mikveh, it's very possible that that could have been in a mikveh that wasn't heated, that wasn't necessarily warm, or whatever other issue that this person thought had a negative effect on this person's illness, made it worse. And this is what this person commented to Rabbeinu Zal, that I know that his going to the mikveh made this thing worse. Rabbeinu Zal answered, why would you want to assume that what made this person more sick is his mitzvahs? It's much better for a person to assume when a person's ill or suffering that it's because of their averos. It's not the mitzvahs that make a person sick, it's the person's averos. And this is mentioned as a point that Rabbeinu Zal made related to this particular item, related to mikveh. We know that Rabbeinu Zal spoke about this in another place also, that there are people that say that there are illnesses that come to a person from going to the mikveh, etc. And Rabbeinu Zal was very strong about this point, that this mitzvah in particular, going to the mikveh on a regular basis, is something that certainly could only do good for a person, and not chas v'sholom the opposite. And in general, for a person never to assume, to put blame on a mitzvah that they did for bringing upon them any suffering or any type of illness. The next paragraph, Reish Tzadik Tes, Rav Nosson says that it was usually his custom to go to visit Rabbeinu Zal after Simchas Torah. We know that Rabbeinu Zal at the time lived in the city of Breslov. Rav Nosson Zal lived in the city of Nemirov, which was a distance of a few hours travel by wagon at the time, and it was his custom, especially after Sukkot, after Simchas Torah, to go visit Rabbeinu Zal and to discuss how the Yontif went, etc. And Rav Nosson Zal writes that every single year when I would come to Rabbeinu Zal after Simchas Torah, he would ask me if I was really in Simcha during this Yontif of Simchas Torah. And Rabbeinu Zal would tell me about how the people made lebedik in his house, how they were singing and dancing, and you could tell that he got tremendous pleasure, tremendous nachas from watching this, from watching the people enjoy the simcha of the yontif, the singing, the dancing, every part of it. Rav Nosson Zal says there was another time in middle of the year, not immediately after Simchas Torah, when Rabbeinu Zal again brought up the topic of Simchas Torah, and he asked me, do I experience a genuine feeling of simcha in my heart on Simchas Torah? Or at least once a year, is there a time when I feel a real deep joy about Hashem, about religion? And Rav Nosson Zal says, Baruch Hashem, Hashem has helped me with His infinite kindness, that there were many times during the year that I experienced this type of joy, the type of joy that a person feels in being a religious Jew, in being zeicha to know about Hashem, to be zeicha to know about the Torah, and to understand what a great privilege it is to be part of this special nation of Hashem. And Rav Nosson says this joy, this feeling is something that nobody could ever tell somebody else exactly what they feel inside about their religion, about being a Jew. A person who actually feels the simcha and the good fortune that a person has in being attached to the Torah, in knowing about Hashem, that simcha is not something that could in any way be put into words and communicated to somebody else. It's something that's only in a person's heart. And Rav Nosson stresses that this item he saw very much by Rabbeinu Zal, that Rabbeinu Zal wanted very much, and he expected from his Talmidim, that they should always be happy 365 days a year. They should be strong in the area of Simcha, especially on Simchas Torah, on Purim, on a Shabbos, on Yom Tov, especially at those times that it should be very clear the person's attitude of sincere Simcha. Rav Nosson Zal says that Rabbeinu Zal said that there was once a time when he brought himself to such tremendous simcha on a Simchas Torah that he was dancing. Usually, a person, if they see a group of people dancing, even if the person's not in the greatest mood, sometimes that can help get the person started up. They join the circle and they join in, and they get an uplifting from that. Rabbeinu Zal told Rav Nosson Zal there was once a time on a Simchas Torah when he was in such good spirits and so happy that there weren't any people around. Could be this was after Hakofis was over, after people had gone home. He was in his own room, alone, privately, and he started dancing alone from Simcha. Just the joy of being a Jew, the joy of knowing how lucky we are to have the Torah and to be part of this religion. Rabbeinu Zal was able to dance alone for a period of time, a length of time, from this Simcha. The next paragraph, Shin, Rav Nosson Zal says, Rabbeinu Zal once told me that every single thing that you see in the world and everything that exists in the world exists for one reason only, and that's bechira, free choice, in order to give a Jew the power to be able to choose between good and bad, between right and wrong, and in order to provide a test for a Jew. That's what the whole creation is all about. Meaning, for example, if we know that the Am Yisrael, the Jewish nation, makes up one tiny fraction of all the billions of people in the world, other nations, and a person would say, does it make sense for Hashem to create, if we are to say, if we are to believe that the purpose of the creation was for the Am Yisrael, would it be sensible for Hashem to make us such a small minority, and there should be so many hundreds of times more non-Jews than Jews? And the answer is again that that's part of the Bechira. That's part of what makes it a test to be a Jew. For a person, there are people who would find it very difficult and ridiculous to be such non-conformists. When you have a world made up of billions of people that have nothing to do with Judaism, that are not locked into a Torah, that are not locked into this type of religion, or for the most part not locked into any religion, there are many people for whom that in itself is a test. And the fact that the person is forced to choose between being part of such a tiny minority versus being part of the majority, that's part one of the nisayon, of the test in free choice. Then within the Jewish nation itself, the fact that we find that there is such a small percentage of people that are observant, that keep Shabbos, that keep mitzvahs, compared to the majority that don't, here again, that whole picture of thousands or millions of people on one side of the scale and a smaller amount on the other side forces a situation where a person is forced to choose. And Rabbeinu Zal says a person has to know that as they live in this world, everything they see, everything they hear, everything that happens to them is all for this purpose, for Bechira, to affect the person's bechira. There are certain things, there are certain times that a person is lucky that Hashem shows the person certain things to push the person in the right direction, to motivate the person to choosing good, to choosing the derech HaTorah, to choosing to come close to Hashem. And there are many times that things are thrown at a person, or pushed at a person, or a person is put into situations purely to see whether this is going to bring the person down, whether this is going to allow the person to make the wrong choice, the wrong decision. And if a person knows this in advance, if a person is told up front that there's a world with billions of things in it, and everything around you is all there to test you, then the least we could assume is that a person would take every precaution possible to be awake, to be alert. If a person knows that they're walking in a minefield where every few inches there are places which if you step there, something will explode in your face and could chas v'shalom take off a leg, take off an arm, an eye, chas v'shalom. Or, on the contrary, if you do the right thing, there are treasures in that same field. There's mines and treasures. Then a person knows that there's a lot of learning to do. A person needs a very serious education to know how to deal with this bechira, to be able to choose, to be able to know what's good, what's bad, so that when I'll see it, I'll be able to recognize it. We know that Rabbi Arizal says in the beginning of the Likutei Moharan that one of the most difficult problems in this world is that unfortunately, quite often, the Satan doesn't come with a sign that says Satan on him. The Satan comes with a sign that says Rabbi so-and-so, or Tzadik so-and-so. Quite often the Satan is nislabesh in mitzvahs. He'll try to convince a person that it's a mitzvah to do this specific item that'll destroy their marriage, chas v'shalom, that'll bring harm to their children, chas v'shalom, or that could cause other irreversible damage in certain cases. And a person needs a very good set of glasses, a very good pair of eyes, to be able to sort out what's really the right thing to do. What does Hashem really want? When the Torah says, Es hachayim ves hamoves nosati lefonecho, Hashem says, I have put life and death in front of you, ubocharto b'chayim, and you should choose life. A person needs a very good encyclopedia to be able to get a definition of what's chayim and what's moves. What's really living? There are people that say, that's living, that's the life. And they don't know that the people who they think are really living it up, really having the best time in the world, they don't know what goes on behind closed doors. They don't know the kind of suffering that those people are experiencing, versus other people who seem to be living in the worst circumstances and could be living the happiest, most fulfilling life that you could imagine. And this is where we're told up front that the purpose of the Bria was Bechira, because originally the Neshamos of the Jews were originally in heaven, part of the Kis Yaakov, the throne of Hashem. We know that the purpose of Hashem sending our Neshamos down into this world is to be tested, and if a person does well on the test, the Neshama returns to take its place in the throne of Hashem. So the question is, why bother? If we started off there, why take us out of there to bring us back there instead of simply leaving there? And the Meforshim answer that the reason for this is that originally the type of pleasure that our Neshamos experienced in receiving a Gan Eden, in receiving a pleasure that we didn't deserve, that we didn't do anything to win, that's a pleasure that's considered incomplete. At most, it's 90%, 98%. And Hashem's love for the Jewish people is such that Hashem was not willing to settle for that. Hashem wants the pleasure, the final pleasure of a Jew, to be 100%. That could only be when a person works for something and earns it. Therefore, Hashem places our neshamos into this world where a person is put to the test, where it becomes a struggle to do the right thing, to serve Hashem, to find out what is the path of life. And if a person goes through that struggle and they succeed, then a person is given their old chair but in a totally different capacity, where this time it's yours based on the fact that you earned it. There's no shame or embarrassment in knowing that a person is accepting charity. They're getting something for free that they didn't earn. Rather, the pleasure is complete. And this all comes based on the bechira of the person, based on this power of bechira. Rav Nosson asks in Likutei Halachos, so if it's a question of free choice, how is it possible that there are tefillos where we ask Hashem to help us be religious? Where's the free choice? I'm asking Hashem to help me in something that it seems it's my duty. I've got to go do it myself. It's a job that I've got to do myself. And Rav Nosson says, Chas v'shalom. On the contrary, this is the most important step in the bechira. For a person to understand that the first decision that you have to make in your bechira, in your free choice, is to choose to solicit Hashem's help. To choose to acknowledge that there's no way in the world you could possibly win this battle on your own. The Gemara says that up front. The Gemara says, B'chol yoim v'yoim yitzrei shalodam miskaber olov. That each and every single day, the Yetzer Hara has new tricks and new plans for each person as to how to wipe that person out religiously. And the Gemara says, V'ilmolei HaKadosh Baruch Hu oizroi, hoya noifel biyodoi. If a person does not get Hashem's help, the person is guaranteed to fail, to fall victim to the tricks of the Satan. So a person is told right up front that bechira, no bechira, you against the Satan, one-on-one, it's no match. He can eat you for breakfast. No problem. The bechira, the only time it's going to be a fair fight where you have a chance of winning, is if you're going to do everything in your power to beg Hashem to help you in this struggle. And this is what our tefillos are all about. When we say v'sein b'libeinu bina lohovenu lahaskil, that Hashem should give us seichel. The Gemara says, what gets a person to commit sins? Lack of seichel. A person doesn't commit a sin unless they become foolish first. We beg Hashem in our tefillos to save us from foolishness, that we should keep our senses about us at all times. And this is one of the main themes of the tefillah of a Jew, trying to tip the scales in our favor in this bechira, in this struggle to make the right choices.
Wouldn't it seem that the safer way, in a sense, would be for Hashem to have allowed all the neshamas to remain in Eden, because the fact is the great majority of people come down and they fail. So if we look at things, could be asked that if we look at things in the balance looks like for Bnei Yisrael as a whole it comes out worse. So how is this thing?
This is a very important point. The question is, if we're saying that Hashem was so interested in that 2% of extra pleasure that would be gotten through a Gan Eden that's earned versus a Gan Eden that's given for free, what about the fact that the majority will fail? The Gemara says clearly, there's a posek, Ki b'kor Hashem tzur olamim. With the letters Yud and Hey, Hashem created olamim, worlds, two worlds. The Gemara says Olam Haba was created with the letter Yud, which is the smallest letter in the Aleph Beis, because of the fact that Olam Haba is going to be a place of very few. These small minority of people are going to be zeicha to get to Olam Haba. So if that's the case, is that what Hashem really wants? And the answer is most definitely yes. There's a posek in Chumash where Hashem says, Ki loi meirubchem choshak Hashem. Hashem doesn't want you because of your large numbers. Hashem's love for Bnei Yisrael isn't because they're the most, they're the biggest. You don't measure it by the kilo. Elo ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim. Hashem wants that little bit. For those few tzadikim that are going to pass the tests, that are going to succeed, for them and for those that will take advantage of those tzadikim, to attach themselves to them and thereby to succeed in their mission in this world, for those few, that's what the whole creation is all about. Simply a small minority based on the billions that have been created in the world who are going to succeed. And there are many statements in the Gemara to substantiate this. the question that the first mission in Pirkei Avos begins with the words Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek L'Olam Haba. That first sentence has about 12 billion mafarshim explaining it, and one of the items that's stressed very much up front is that Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek L'Olam Haba means each and every single Jew has a reserved seat in Olam Haba, which he's in a position to hold on to or to forfeit. To the extent that the Gemara says, there's another side. Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek L'Gehenem Gamkein. Each and every single Jew has a reserved seat in both places. The Gemara says that's why it says Lochein bi'artzam mishne yirshu. I believe that's the wording of the posek. That a tzadik receives a double portion. The tzadik gets his own chair in Gan Eden, plus the other chairs that have been vacated by those people who chose the other place, who chose the warmer climate. So Yesh Lahem Chelek means you have the opportunity. Each person has the option. That's the choice again. It's a very big problem. It's a very difficult situation. The problem existed throughout the history of Klal Yisrael. The problem existed during the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. During the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was living, Moshe Rabbeinu was a very great rabbi. There were other very great rabbis, tzadikim, who misled Jews into committing suicide, spiritual suicide, whether it be Korach, whether it be the 250 Roshei Sanhedrin that went with him, whether it be the Meraglim, who were giants, actual giants in religion, tzadikim, again. And unfortunately, the Gemara says, Kol HaGodol Mechavero Yitzroi Godlei Menu, that these tzadikim also have a Yetzer Hara, and their Yetzer Hara is even much more difficult than ours. And therefore, part of the test of a Jew in every single generation is to be able to sort out. Each and every single Jew has to look for himself, based on his own honesty and sincerity with himself, to be able to select who he thinks is a true tzaddik and who isn't, and who's a bigger tzaddik and who's a smaller tzaddik. Depending on how ill I consider myself to be, that's what determines how much of a specialist I need to deal with my spiritual illness. If a person really feels that they're on a low madrega, then they need a very great tzaddik to be metapel with them. How do you find it? It's a lifelong quest. Each and every single Jew is responsible to search and search and search until they feel positive that they found what they believe is the tzaddik to lead them on the derech hachaim. There's no question. That again is part of the bechira of a Jew. Free choice. And what about those people? What do you mean? A person who attached himself, a person who went looking for a rabbi, and he found the rabbi, and he happened to pick Korach. He happened to pick Rabbi Korach instead of Rabbi Moshe. Could you condemn him? He's such a nice guy. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't a balgaiva. He didn't make himself up to be the rabbi. He went looking for a rabbi. The answer is there also. The Gemara says, "B'derech shodom roitze leilech moilichen oisai." It depends on us. It depends on you. Each and every person, according to how sincere he is in what he's looking for, that's also going to have a very serious effect on what he finds and who he finds. According to how honest, the Gemara says that a person that's honest can tell when somebody is lying to them, when somebody is being dishonest with them. Rabbi Arizal brings it in Sefer Midas in the beginning, that a person who has the midas o emes, when somebody tries to put one over on them, they'll feel it, they'll sense it. And here again, it depends a lot. A person has to study Torah in order to be able to determine what's a tzaddik, what's a rabbi. And a person has to beg Hashem to be zeicha to the midah of emes, to be able to distinguish between manhigei emes or manhigim who have a smaller degree of emes. There's thousands of different levels. Okay. The next paragraph Shin Aleph, 301. Rav Nosson writes, Shomati b'shmoi, I heard it told over in the name of Rabbi Nazal, that Rabbi Nazal said that the main avodah of a Jew is that during the winter, when the nights are longer, that the person should make sure to split the night. Not to use the entire night for sleeping, but half the night is enough. To use the first half of the night for sleeping, the first 4 hours or so, let's say, and to get up at chatzos, to get up at midnight, and use those hours from midnight through the morning, that's the main avodah of a Jew, to use those hours for serving Hashem, for Torah, for tefillah. That's during the winter nights. And during the summer, where in Chutz La'aretz, in Russia where they lived, there is no chatzos because the nights are so short. The overlap between morning and chatzos sometimes is to such an extent that it's not possible to have this midnight. At least to get up very early in the morning, at the same time as the morning star comes up, which is way before sunrise, and to start serving Hashem at that time. That's the Ikar Avodas Isha Yisraeli. And this is a very important point that was stressed by the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh and stressed by Rabbi Arizal also, that in terms of a religious Jew, the most difficult part, the Gemara says, Kol hascholos koshois. The hardest part is the beginning of anything, the beginning of life, the beginning of marriage. Anytime a person makes a beginning, person starts becoming religious, after not having been religious, the beginning is the most difficult part. And so too within a day, each and every single day in a Jew's life is also a whole lifetime. And within the day, the most difficult part is the beginning. If a person is able to do the beginning right, he's covered 90% of the problem is solved. 90% of the battle is won. And therefore, Rabbi Arizal stressed, as the Shulchan Aruch stresses. The Shulchan Aruch begins with the words, Yizgaber ko'ari lamoy baboiker, that there's tremendous emphasis on how a person wakes up in the morning, to make sure to wake up very powerful, like a lion, strong as a lion, speedy, fast as a deer. And if a person starts off that way, then that's 90% of the battle. That's 90% of being religious, is making sure to take advantage of those first hours, versus a person who shows up late. When the war is going on, a person comes straggling in all the way at the end. Whether they won or lost, he's not really going to be able to take full advantage of what took place. And here, Rabbi Arizal, as the Zohar Kodesh and Sifrei Kabbalah, put tremendous emphasis on this avodah of chatzos, that for those people for whom it's possible to be able to try based on their on schedules, whoever is capable of working this out, to be able to get up to be able to go to sleep early enough at night, where they're able to get the amount of sleep that they need, and still be able to get up at midnight or shortly afterwards, and be able to do the avodas that are done then. That's considered to be the Ikra Avodas Isha Yisraeli. Just as the Gemara says about David HaMelech, that a major part of his success in giving nachas to Hashem was the fact that each and every single night he would wake up at chatzos, and that's when he would sing his shiros v'tishvachos. That's when he would learn his choicest portion of Torah was at that time. We know the Gemara says that the night was created only for learning, lishinsa, which means learning also, and the Rambam Zal writes that the Ikar Hatzlacha, especially in Limud of Torah Shebal Peh, is bedafka at night. Now again, which part of the night is he talking about? Obviously it's this second section of the night. Just as when it comes to Shabbos, one of the most outstanding mitzvahs in terms of showing respect for Shabbos is Tosfos Shabbos, to steal a little bit of Friday and turn it into Shabbos, to add to the Shabbos, not to begin the Shabbos exactly when it gets dark outside, but to take a few hours of the Yemei HaChol and convert it to Shabbos. So too in terms of what people normally assume to be the day, when the day begins, those Jews that are zeichet to steal a couple of hours of the night and attach it to the day, to begin their religion, to wake up while it's still dark, and then to be learning, then to be davening, that's considered a very special part of the success of a Jew. It's important to stress, based on what I saw from our own rabbis, Zichron Livracha, at the time that we lived in Chutz La'aretz, people who had a working schedule where they were required to be on a job, a regular job, from 9 to 5, etc., or that type of schedule, that type of structure, it seems that he understood that for those people to attempt to get up at chatzos every single night would be an impossibility, could wreak havoc on their lives, on their parnassus, on their family life and everything, and therefore this item was not stressed. Whenever the opportunity came up on a Tisha B'Av or other choice nights of the year, Shavuos, then certainly it's a privilege if a person is zeicha to be awake and to use those hours for the study of Torah. However, I did hear recently from one of the Zakenim of Chassidut Breslov, Reb Michal Shlita, that he did stress that even a person for whom it's impossible to do this every night of the week, even if a person could do this one night a week, that also is considered a very great accomplishment. And recently I saw that this is brought in the Shulchan Aruch Harav. In the first Lubavitch Rabbi's Shulchan Aruch, he mentions this item, that if a person can say Tikkun Chatzos one night a week, that's also considered an avodah in Tikkun Chatzos. And certainly this could be applied to once a month. Each person has to find their level, their place, what a person is capable of doing, what a person is incapable, what's too much, what's too little. But for a person to know that this is something very special, and if it's possible for a person to establish some type of a kviyas in this, whether it be once a month, once a week, to know that this is first class. This is the best that a person could do within a certain framework of Yiddishkeit. Yes.
How did they do this to the Shabbos, which is supposed to be very long?
I've heard from a few of the Zkanim of Chassidut Breslov that they said there's a special Yetzer Hara by Jews to stay up late. Meaning this concept of being awake during those first hours of the night. And again, this is a concept of a Yetzer Hara coming dressed up sometimes as a rabbi, giving a person all kinds of mitzvahs to do, mitzvahs, that are going to force them to stay up late, so that they'll get up late for minyan, or they'll chas v'sholom rachmon litzlan miss Zman Kriya Shema, or miss that choicest part of the day, which is the early hours. Those first hours, which are unquestionably the best hours of every person's productivity. If a person is awake and really seriously alert for those first hours, the person can do twice as much or 10 times as much as somebody else who's off balance. And I've seen these tzaddikim, I've seen Azrizus, not to say chas v'sholom, that they'll skimp on the meal, that they won't have fish, or they won't have soup, or they won't have chicken, or they won't sing zmiras, chas v'sholom. They'll do all of it, but with an eye on the clock, knowing that there's a seder, there's a schedule to my day. Every minute is calculated, and there are certain times in the day that are better, certain times of the day that are most critical, and I can't afford to miss out on that. I can't afford to exchange something cheaper for something that's much more special. Naturally, there are extenuating circumstances. A person goes to a wedding, let's say, something like that, where even then, these tzaddikim have gotten so used to it and oriented, where to them it's like clockwork, where automatically, even if it means sometimes getting an hour or two of sleep, the body has gotten so used to this seder of this broken night or this half night that they can handle it. Again, each person has to judge for themselves within their own lifestyle where the Yetzer Hara is, where the Yetzer Tov is. And for a person to be able to figure out which hours are the best for them and to make sure that they don't chas v'sholom squander precious time. Rabbi Arizal once made a statement to one of his Talmidim, Est und schläft nur hite Zeit. Eat and sleep. Just watch the time. Meaning, being religious doesn't mean necessarily fasting. And it doesn't mean not sleeping either. You're supposed to eat and you're supposed to sleep, but do it with a clock. Keep a clock, watch how many hours you need to sleep. Anything that's extra, don't fall into that trap. In terms of eating, fine, you have to eat. Don't let a meal schlep out to be an hour or 2 hour production. Eating, if it's done right, could be 15, 20 minutes without chas v'sholom gulping down the food. If a person eats properly, where they're eating to a maximum of 2/3 capacity, and a person's eating with a seder and with a quiet, without balagan, without getting up from their chair and running around the middle of the meal and trying to do 10 other things, a person finds that things have a seder and they have much more time to do what they need to do, what they would want to do. The next paragraph, Shin Beis, Rav Nosson Zal says, I was once standing in front of Rabbeinu Zal, and Rabbeinu Zal was laying down at the time. And he burst out with a statement. He said, their ikar is mi beten she'oil shivati. The main thing is, and he quoted a statement of Yoina Hanovi. The Torah tells us that at one point in time, Yoina Hanovi went through a whole experience where he was thrown overboard on a ship, and he was swallowed by a large fish, and he remained inside the stomach of this fish for a period of 3 days. And what did he do for those 3 days? He did what any tzadik would do if he's not in a beis medrash with sforim, if he doesn't have a sefer Torah with him. He was osek in tefillah. He did what Moshe Rabbeinu did during the 40 years that he was in Ethiopia. He did what Avraham Avinu did for years and years. He was osek in tefillah, in his splitedus, speaking to Hashem. And one of the statements that Yoina Hanovi made there was, Mi beten she'oil shivati elecha. Hashem, I feel that I'm calling out to you from the belly of Gehenna. There were no lights, there were no fluorescents or incandescent bulbs in the belly of this fish. Picture being in total darkness, submerged in the ocean. He felt literally that he was in the lowest place possible. And what did he do there? He called out to Hashem. He said to Hashem, if I'm in Gehenna now, then I'm calling out to you from the depths of Gehenna themselves. And Rabbeinu Zal said that this is the ikar for a Jew, meaning that a person has to know within life, everybody goes through different experiences, ups and downs. Some of the most critical times in a person's life are bedafka when the person is down, when a person is not feeling so religious and not in such good spirits and not really in the mood to serve Hashem, to be religious. And at a time like that, a person doesn't throw it all away, but rather he tries to do whatever he can do. If you can't learn, if a person really feels that there are certain low that they can't learn, then at least to be mekayim this mi beten she'oil shivati, at least to scream out to Hashem from the low place that they find themselves in. Sometimes that could be a time where a person's whole life can turn around in an unbelievable way. Rav Nosson Zal explains in Likutei Halachos the concept of a pendulum, that a pendulum that swings around in the form of a half circle, and before the pendulum starts going up, it has to first reach a certain bottom, literally all the way down, and when it reaches that lowest point, that's a sign that it's got only one direction to go in, and that's upward. When? If it keeps moving. The whole trick is to keep moving. If a person is in a low place and they decide to stay still, suddenly they freeze, they go into a deep freeze, and the person gets embalmed, and it's the end, chas v'shalom. That's the end. As long as a person is not willing to stay still, but even when they feel they're all the way on bottom, a person is persistent in calling out to Hashem, and this mi beten she'oil shivati, in begging Hashem for help, even from the low place that I'm in, the person is guaranteed that there's only one way they could possibly go from there, and that's straight up. And this, Rabbeinu Zal stressed, is a very important piece of information for us to know. The next item, paragraph Shin Gimel. Rav Nosson Zal writes that one time Rabbeinu Zal spoke to me about how despicable the taiva hayadua is. The desire, the sinful type of desire that men have for illicit relations, chas v'shalom, with women. And Rabbeinu Zal said that a person who allows their mind to wander and allows themselves to have the wrong types of thoughts, chas v'shalom, that person is a real fool. Because Rabbeinu Zal said, let's look at it from a practical standpoint. Which normal person would want to be caught, chas v'shalom, committing this type of sin, actually going ahead and committing a sin with another woman, chas v'shalom? Nobody wants to go through that embarrassment and the destruction, chas v'shalom, that they know comes from that. How we know that people's entire lives things, reputations that people worked 30, 40, 50 years to build up, everything can literally be flushed away with one mistake like this. A person, chas v'shalom, getting caught in such a mistake. So therefore, Rabbi Arizal said, even a person who's not that religious at least knows that much, that they wouldn't want to get caught, chas v'shalom, in committing this type of crime. Because a person doesn't want to have that bizoyan, that embarrassment. Therefore, why bother making yourself nuts and allowing your mind to dwell, to think, and to fantasize, and to think all kinds of wrong thoughts, which are only going to be putting the person through a needless pain. The person's going to make themselves suffer through something which the person wouldn't even want the thing ever chas v'shalom to come through, because they know the sakon involved, they know the danger and the destruction that could come from it. And Rav Nosson writes, it's been stressed in our Sforim many times that a Jew must know that there's no such thing as not being able to control my thoughts. Every single Jew is definitely in a position to have a handle on what they think about and what they don't think about. Rabbi Nachman stressed that there's no way that it's possible for a human being to be concentrating on two thoughts at the same time. Therefore, the only time that these sinful types of thoughts will enter into a person's mind is if the brain is vacant at the time, if there's nothing else occupying that space at the time. If a person is careful to make sure that they don't leave the brain vacant, but rather that they're using the brain for Torah, for tefillah, or even for thinking any type of constructive thoughts, automatically that alone will be enough to serve as a barrier for keeping away, chas v'shalom, these types of sinful thoughts. And Rav Nosson says, if you'll take a look at our Sforim, there are many places where this item is discussed in great detail in terms of all the advice that's given for how a person could overcome this item. In the next paragraph, Shin Dalid, Rav Nosson continues, and he says that there was once a time when Rabbi Nachman was making a joke out of this. Rabbi Nachman was laughing, mocking the fact that we find that in our tefillah, in Shachris, one of the things that we say right after the Birchas HaShachar, in the Hirotzain there, we say, Va'al tevieni, lo lidei nisoyon, v'lo lidei vizoyon. Hashem, please save me, chas v'shalom, from having to go through any test or any shame, any embarrassment. And Rabbi Nachman said these words, Odor anisoyon, odor abizoyon. Person has to know that this is the choice, this is the deal. It's either or. It's either you pass the test, or you better be prepared to accept the full brunt of shame and embarrassment, chas v'shalom, that automatically goes together with failure, chas v'shalom, of any test, especially in this particular area. Rav Nosson stresses that Rabbi Nachman said that if a person has any seichel, if a person is really intelligent, they know that this is no test. A person who knows a little bit about the human anatomy, about how the body works, could easily be able to figure out ways to come to despise this taiva, where this would become a repulsive item by the person, these types of lewd thoughts, chas v'shalom, or desires, Rahman al-Islam. And Rabbi Nachman said, however, as much as all it takes is a little bit of seichel to overcome this, unfortunately, the majority of people, because of the fact that they're so steeped in gashmias, and because of the fact that they've gotten so used to this item being so important and played up in such a big way, then to these types of people, even if you'll tell them that it's despicable, it's disgusting and everything, it won't be enough to help them. It won't solve their problem. But rather the opposite way. It'll arouse further thoughts in their minds, and it'll get them thinking even more and dwelling on this even more. Therefore, Rabbi Nachman says, for the majority of the people, the best advice is not to get into any discussions with the Yetzer Hara on this. Not to try to think it out and figure it out and dwell on it in any way in a person's mind, but simply just to stay away. Anytime a person sees any of these types of thoughts coming, immediately to shift gears and to occupy the mind with something else, to put their mind somewhere else on something else, and automatically that alone will break the connection where a person will find they become free of these kinds of thoughts. We know that the Gemara says that in this particular area, koshe hirhuri avera me avera, that in this item specifically, a thought of sin could chas v'shalom cause more damage than an actual maisa, an actual action of sin. When a person has sinful thoughts in this area, the Meforshim explain that this could force a neshama to actually come down into this world without having a body to go into, and chas v'shalom, this causes untold damage and harm. Halavai, we should be zeicha to accept the advice of the tzadikim and to follow the derech hachayim, to be mekayim the ubacharta b'chayim, to choose the path of life, the path of Torah, and be zeicha thereby to get to see the coming of Moshiach, the Binyan Beis Hamikdash, v'mher of Yameinu, Amen v'Amen.